The pen hovered over the contract as the lawyer said, "Sign now or lose everything." But the man she was being forced to marry hadn't taken his eyes off the door, as if he expected trouble to walk in any second. Ruth Ellison didn't sit when they told her to. The chair scraped behind her, empty, while the paper on the desk carried more weight than any gun in the room. Outside, a wagon rattled past the courthouse steps, and someone laughed like nothing was breaking apart inside these walls. The cowboy beside the door, broad-shouldered, quiet, didn't move closer, didn't claim her, didn't even look at the contract. He just watched the hallway, hand loose at his side, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. Ruth pressed her palm to the page anyway, steady as ever, knowing this wasn't a marriage. It was a line being drawn. And once she crossed it, there would be no stepping back. Would you have signed it, or walked away with nothing? Stay with me. This story doesn't rush, and neither should you. The office smelled like old pine and ink that had dried too many summers ago. Ruth Ellison stood by the desk without sitting. Her hand rested flat on the paper, fingers steady, as if the weight of it might keep the page from blowing away. Outside, a wagon rolled past on Main Street, its wheels dragging slow through dust. Someone laughed. Someone else called out about feed prices. Life carried on just beyond the window. Inside, nothing moved. Milton Graves cleared his throat and adjusted his cuffs. He had a way of speaking that made everything sound settled before it ever was. "You've read it," he said. Ruth didn't look at him. "I have." The paper under her palm crackled softly. It listed boundaries she knew by heart, fence lines she had walked in winter, water rights her husband had argued over at that same desk. His name was still there, in faded ink. Samuel Ellison. Dead 6 months, and still printed cleaner than the truth of what had happened to him. Milton slid a pen closer to her. "Then you understand the terms." "I understand what you're asking." "It's not a matter of asking, Mrs. Ellison." She lifted her eyes then, calm, not soft. Milton didn't hold that gaze long. He turned instead to the man standing near the door. Eli Turner hadn't moved since she came in. He stood with his hat in his hands, turning at once without thinking, then still again. Dust clung to his boots. His shirt was clean but worn at the collar. He took up space in the room the way a storm takes up sky, quiet, but impossible to ignore. Ruth had heard the stories. Everyone had. A fight near Dry Creek. A man left in the dirt. Didn't get back up. No one ever agreed on what came first, the swing or the threat. Only that Eli Turner walked away and the other man didn't. Milton followed her glance. "Mr. Turner has agreed to the arrangement." Eli didn't nod, didn't speak. Ruth looked back down at the paper. "Marriage," she said, almost to herself. "Or forfeiture." Milton folded his hands. "The bank is patient, but not charitable. Your late husband left debts tied to the water access on your land. Without a legal partner of standing, the claim can be reassessed." She knew what that meant. Everyone in Redstone Ridge knew what it meant. Reassessed meant taken. She thought of the well behind the house, the sound of the bucket hitting water, the small garden she kept even after Samuel died, the ledger she balanced at night by lantern light, pencil worn to the nub. All of it could be wiped away with a signature, or kept. She looked at Eli again. He wasn't watching her the way the others did, not measuring, not waiting for something to break. He was looking at the floor between them, like he had already decided where his place was in this room. "You don't have to say anything?" she asked him. His voice came low, steady. "No." Milton gave a tight smile. "Mr. Turner understands the arrangement is practical." Ruth let out a slow breath, the kind that doesn't change anything. She picked up the pen. The ink hesitated at the tip before it touched paper. Outside, a horse snorted. A door slammed. Wind pressed lightly against the window glass. She signed. Milton took the paper before the ink had fully dried. "Well," he said too quickly, "that settles it." Nothing about it felt settled. The church sat at the far end of town, white paint peeling along the edges, the bell silent. By the time they arrived, a handful of people had gathered, not for celebration, for watching. Mrs. Keller from the general store stood with her arms crossed. Two ranch hands leaned against the hitching post, hats tipped low. Someone whispered. Someone else didn't bother lowering their voice. Ruth heard her own name once, then stopped listening. The preacher kept it short. He read the words like he was trying to outrun them. Eli stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through the thin fabric of her sleeve. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't shift his weight toward her. When it came time, he said his part without hesitation. Ruth did the same. No tremble, no pause, just words. "Amen," the preacher said, and that was it. No applause, no congratulations. Only the scrape of boots on wooden floorboards as people turned to leave. Outside, the wind had picked up. It carried the smell of dry grass and distant rain that might never come. Ruth stepped down from the porch first. Eli followed a pace behind. For a moment, they stood there, neither of them speaking, the town stretching out ahead like something neither of them quite belonged to. Milton approached with the folded contract tucked under his arm. "I'll see this filed by tomorrow," he said. "Everything will be in order." Ruth looked at the paper, then past it, out toward the road that led back to her land, or what used to be hers. Eli shifted beside her, just slightly, not closer, not farther, waiting. She turned without a word and walked toward the hitching rail. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer a hand, just followed. Behind them, the church door creaked shut, and the paper Milton carried caught the wind for a second, edges lifting, like it wanted to leave his grasp. He held on tight, too tight for something that was supposed to be settled. Ruth didn't look back, not at the church, not at the town, and not at the man she had just married. The road out of Redstone Ridge stretched narrow and pale, pressed flat by wagon wheels and long seasons of dust. Ruth kept her eyes ahead. The reins sat firm in her hands, leather worn smooth where fingers had held them before hers. Eli rode beside her, not quite level, half a horse's length back, like he meant to follow, not lead. They passed the last of the buildings without a word. The blacksmith's shop, the feed store, a boy kicking at a loose board near the well. No one called after them. Wind picked up once they cleared the ridge. It came down off the rocks in long, steady breaths, carried grit, carried the smell of dry earth and something sharper beneath it. Ruth pulled her collar up, didn't slow. Eli adjusted his hat against the gust, said nothing. It took near an hour before the land changed. The ground broke uneven, climbing into low stone outcrops, sparse grass, a fence line that leaned in places but still held. His place. The gate stood open when they reached it. One hinge sagged just enough to show it had been meaning to give way for a while. Ruth rode through first. Eli stopped long enough to set the gate back in place, lifted it slightly with one hand, settled it where the hinge caught, tested it once, then followed. The house sat low against the wind. Woodboards darkened by years of weather. One window patched with newer glass that didn't quite match the rest. No smoke from the chimney, no dog barking, no sign anyone had been waiting. Ruth dismounted without looking back. Her boots hit the ground firm. She took in the yard quick. Water barrel, chopping block, a coil of rope near the porch steps. Everything in its place. Everything alone. Eli tied the horses, gave hers an extra pat along the neck before stepping away. "You can take the room off the back," he said, voice low like it had been in the office. "Door shuts, window holds." Ruth nodded once, picked up her bag. Inside, the air was cooler, dim. It carried the faint smell of coffee grounds and clean wood, like the place had been kept up but never lived in. A table stood near the window, 2 chairs, one slightly pulled back, like someone had sat there not long ago and just didn't return. She set her bag on the bed in the back room. The mattress dipped when she pressed a hand into it. Firm, not new, but cared for. There was a basin on the stand, a folded towel, a pitcher filled halfway. She touched the edge of the towel, still dry. Outside, she heard the creak of wood. Eli on the porch, not pacing, just shifting weight. Ruth stepped back into the main room. He stood near the doorframe, one hand braced against it, watching the yard, not her. "I'll be out at the lower fence come morning," he said. "Water runs thinner there." She leaned against the table, arms loose at her sides. "You keep records?" she asked. He nodded toward a small ledger near the window. She crossed the room and picked it up. Names, numbers, dates, feed counts, rain marks, careful handwriting, not rushed. She flipped a page, then another. "Not what they say about you," she said, quiet. He didn't answer that, didn't look at her either, just reached for his coat hanging on the peg. "I'll take the bunk in the shed tonight," he said. "Give you space." Ruth's hand paused on the page. "You don't have to," she said. He shrugged once. "I know." That was all. He stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a soft click. No slam, no hesitation. Ruth stood there a moment longer, the ledger still open in her hands. The wind pressed against the walls again. Longer this time. She set the book back where she found it. By late afternoon, the sky turned the dull color that came before evening winds. Ruth stepped outside with a length of wire and a hammer she'd taken from the side shelf. The fence along the west side had given in 2 places. Not broken, just tired. She set to work. The rhythm came back easy. Pull, twist, set. The kind of work that didn't ask questions, didn't give answers either. She didn't hear Eli come up behind her, only felt the shift in the air when he stopped a few paces off. "Post's loose," he said. "I see it." She braced the wire tighter. The wood groaned, then split. The top half gave way faster than she expected. Ruth stepped back, but the broken edge caught her sleeve, pulling her forward with it. Eli moved then, 1 step, his hand closed around her upper arm, steady and firm. Not rough, not soft, just enough. The post hit the ground beside her with a dull crack. Dust lifted, settled. For a second, neither of them moved, his hand still on her arm. Her breath caught somewhere between in and out. Then he let go, stepped back. "Should have said sooner," he muttered. Ruth straightened her sleeve, looked at the fallen post. "You did." He bent to lift the wood, tested the base, already figuring the fix. She watched him a moment. The way he handled the weight. Easy, like it didn't matter. The way he didn't look back at her, didn't check if she was shaken, didn't ask if she was all right. Just trusted she was. Ruth turned back to the wire. "Pass me the nails," she said. He did. No comment. No pause. They worked the rest of the fence in silence. When the last post held, Eli stepped back and pressed it once with his boot. It stayed. Ruth wiped her hands on her skirt. The wind had eased. For the first time since the church, the quiet didn't feel empty. Just unfinished. She walked back toward the house. Eli followed, same distance as before. Not closer, not farther. Inside, the light had shifted gold through the window. Ruth set the hammer down. Eli moved to the stove, added a piece of wood without asking. The flame caught slow. She poured water into the kettle. Neither spoke. But neither left. And that, she realized, was something. Morning came thin and pale over the ridge, the kind of light that didn't promise warmth, only clarity. Ruth was already outside when Eli stepped off the porch. A tin cup sat on the rail, steam lifting slow from the coffee she'd poured and left untouched. She stood near the water trough, sleeves rolled, checking the level with a stick marked in careful lines. He paused there a moment, watched how she worked. Not rushed, not wasted. Dropped near half an inch since last week, she said without turning. Eli stepped closer, boots quiet on packed dirt. Looked where she pointed. Wind's been pulling harder, he said, and something upstream's changed. That caught his attention. He glanced toward the low stretch beyond the ridge where the land dipped and twisted out of sight. Maybe, he said. Ruth set the stick aside. Maybe doesn't move water. He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded once and went to saddle his horse. By noon, the sky had taken on a heavy look. Clouds building slow from the west, thickening like something being gathered by unseen hands. Ruth rode the boundary line of her old land. Still hers, on paper. For now. Eli kept pace beside her. They found the break just past a cluster of scrub oak, fence wire bent inward, hoof prints deep in the dirt. Not theirs. Ruth slid down from her saddle, knelt to press her fingers into the tracks. Too many, she said. Eli crouched beside her, studied the ground. Driven, he said, not wandered. She looked up toward the ridge again, toward land that didn't belong to her. Whitlock, she said. Eli didn't answer right away. Then, likely. They stood there a moment, wind picking up around them, carrying the first hint of rain. Ruth straightened. I'll speak to him. No. The word came quick, not loud, just firm. She turned to him. It's my land. And his men, Eli said. He won't hear you. Not alone. I've dealt with men like him before. I know. Something in his voice made her pause. Not doubt. Recognition. Ruth brushed dirt from her hands. Then you know I don't wait for permission. Eli looked at her then. Really looked. The wind pushed her hair loose from its tie. Dust clung to the edge of her skirt. There was nothing delicate in the way she stood. Just steady. I'm not telling you no, he said after a moment. I'm telling you it won't go how you think. And you know how I think? No, he said. But I know him. That hung there between them. Ruth exhaled once, slow. Then come with me, she said. Eli didn't move. The silence stretched just long enough to shift something. I won't stand behind you, he said. I didn't ask you to. Another beat. Then he nodded. The storm broke before they reached the lower pasture. Rain came hard, fast, thick enough to blur the land ahead. The ground turned slick beneath the horses, mud rising where dust had been just minutes before. By the time they reached the edge of the field, the sky had gone near black. A sharp crack split the air. Ruth turned at the sound. The old barn at the far end sagged under the wind, one side giving way where the beams had been weakened. Inside, a mare kicked against the stall, panic rising with each thunderclap. She's close, Ruth said, already moving. Ruth, but she was off the horse, boots sliding as she ran. The barn groaned again, wood shifting, nails pulling. Ruth pushed through the door. Inside, the air was thick with dust and fear. The mare reared, rope straining, eyes wide and wild. Easy, Ruth said, voice low but steady. She stepped closer, hands out, ignoring the way the animal struck the ground. Another crack overhead. Eli came in behind her, took one look at the beam above. Not safe, he said. She'll break her leg if she panics. She might anyway. Ruth reached for the rope. The mare jerked hard, too hard. Her hind leg lashed out. Eli moved without thinking. One step, his arm wrapped around Ruth's waist, pulling her back just as the hoof struck where she'd been. The force of it knocked them both off balance. They stumbled into the wall, dust shaking loose from the beams above. For a second, everything stilled. The storm, the mare, the sound of rain. All of it pulled tight into that one moment. Ruth turned toward him, breath sharp, ready to snap. And then it happened. Eli leaned in. Not slow, not planned. His mouth found hers in a single, brief press. Rough with rain and breath and something held back too long. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. But it wasn't force either. Just there. And then gone. He pulled back like he'd touched something he wasn't meant to. Ruth stared at him. Rain hammered the roof. The mare shifted behind them, quieter now. Neither of them spoke. Eli stepped away first, ran a hand through his hair, water dripping from his sleeve. "We need to get her out," he said, voice back to steady, like nothing had happened. Ruth stood there a moment longer, then turned, went back to the rope. Together, they worked the mare loose, led her out into the open where the storm had already begun to ease. By the time they finished, the rain had softened to a steady fall. The sky lightened just enough to see the ridge again. Ruth wiped her hands on her skirt. Eli stood a few feet off, not looking at her, not avoiding her either, just there. The space between them felt different now. Not closer, not farther, just changed. Ruth picked up the reins, mounted without a word. Eli followed. They rode back toward the house as the last of the storm rolled past. Neither spoke. But neither pretended nothing had happened, and that made it harder to ignore. The morning after the storm came quiet. Too quiet. Ruth stepped out before sunrise, boots still damp from the night before. The air had that washed clean smell, sharp and cold, like the land had been stripped down to something honest. Eli was already at the fence. Of course he was. He had a hammer in one hand, resetting the post that had split the day before. Each strike landed even, measured, like he had no reason to rush. Ruth watched a moment before speaking. "You always work this early?" He didn't look up. "When it needs it." She nodded once, walked past him toward the trough. The water line had dropped again. Not much, but enough. By mid-morning, a rider came up the road, hat pulled low, coat too clean for ranch work. Ruth knew the type before he even dismounted. He handed over a folded notice without greeting. "Filed this morning," he said. "County court." Eli took the paper. Didn't unfold it right away. Ruth reached for it first. The seal broke with a dry snap. She read it once, then again. "Fraudulent marriage," she said under her breath. "Claiming lack of standing. Petition to seize land under disputed ownership." She let the paper fall slightly in her hand. "Whitlock," she said. The writer shrugged. "Name's on it." He tipped his hat once and turned his horse back toward town. No conversation. No need. Ruth folded the notice tight. "He wants the land clean," she said. "No questions tied to it." Eli finally looked at her. "Then he'll ask questions about me." Ruth met his gaze. They already are. The hearing room sat above the general store, narrow and hot by noon. Wood benches lined the walls. A few men stood near the back, hats in hand, voices low. Ruth walked in first. Eli followed. Same distance as always. Milton Graves stood near the front, papers in hand. Expression already decided. Harvey Whitlock sat by the window, coat draped over the chair beside him. He didn't stand when they entered, just watched, like he'd been waiting. "Mrs. Ellison," Milton said. "Mr. Turner." Ruth took her seat. Eli remained standing a moment longer before lowering himself beside her. The bench creaked under his weight. The judge spoke. Slow, formal. Whitlock's claim was simple. The marriage had been arranged under pressure. Questionable legality. Questionable intent. Without it, Ruth had no protection. Without protection, the land defaulted. Clean, neat, convenient. Milton added his part. "The gentleman beside her," he said, glancing at Eli, "has a history that raises concern. The court should consider whether this arrangement was entered in good faith." A murmur moved through the room. Ruth felt it before she heard it. The story had reached here. Of course it had. Milton continued. "A man died following an altercation involving Mr. Turner. That fact alone, it wasn't like that." The voice came from the back. Clear, older, heads turned. A woman stepped forward from near the door, gray hair pulled tight, hands steady despite the room watching her now. Clara Boone. Ruth had seen her before. The boarding house near the far end of town. Didn't speak much. Didn't need to. "He didn't start that fight," Clara said. "And the man who died wasn't some innocent caught in it." Whitlock's jaw tightened just slightly. The judge leaned forward. "You are?" "Clara Boone. I run the boarding house on Cedar Street." She didn't hurry. Didn't raise her voice. "Man who died was named Carter Wells," she went on. "He'd been asking questions about water access weeks before, offering money to the wrong folks, trying to buy out small claims." Ruth's fingers tightened around the edge of the bench. Clara's eyes shifted briefly toward Whitlock. Didn't like being told no. The room went quieter. "Night it happened," Clara said. "He came out near Turner's lower well, tools in hand, not for fixing." Eli didn't move, didn't confirm, didn't deny. Clara continued. "Mr. Turner found him there. Words were exchanged. I don't know all of them, but I know this." Wells swung first, and what he was there to do would have cost that land its water by morning. Ruth felt something shift inside her. A piece sliding into place she hadn't known was loose. Whitlock stood slowly. "That's a story," he said, "not proof." Clara met his gaze. "Then maybe you should explain why a man tied to your contracts was digging into someone else's well after dark." Silence again, thicker this time. Ruth turned her head slightly toward Eli. He was still looking forward, hands resting on his knees, not clenched, not shaking, just still. The judge cleared his throat. "This court will review the claim," he said. "No seizure until then." Whitlock's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Outside, the air felt tighter, like the storm hadn't finished with them. Ruth stepped down from the building. Eli followed. They walked a few paces before she stopped. "You knew," she said. He didn't ask what she meant. About the man, about why he was there. Eli looked out toward the ridge beyond town. "I knew what he was doing. And you didn't say anything. No one asked." Ruth let out a breath. Not sharp, not soft. Just there. My husband died over water rights, she said. Did you know that? Eli's jaw shifted slightly. I heard. He was arguing with Whitlock the week before. She looked down at her hands. Next thing I knew, I was signing papers I didn't fully understand. The wind moved between them, carried dust along the road. Ruth lifted her eyes again. You think it's the same? Eli didn't answer right away. Then, I think men like Whitlock don't change methods. That was enough. Ruth nodded once. Not agreement, not acceptance, just recognition. They stood there a moment longer. Then she turned toward the horses. Eli followed, same distance. But something in the space between them had shifted again, less guarded, more aware. Back at the ranch, Ruth set the court notice on the table, flattened it with her palm. The ink looked darker now, more permanent. Eli stood by the door, not leaving, not stepping closer. Next move? He asked. Ruth looked at the paper, then out the window, toward the lowland where the water ran thin. He's not done, she said. No. Then we don't wait for him. Eli nodded once. That was all. No plan spoken, no promise made. But for the first time since the paper in Milton's office, Ruth didn't feel alone in it. And that changed more than anything Whitlock had written. The wind came back that night. Not a storm. Not like before. Just steady, relentless. Pressing against the walls, slipping through the seams of the house like it had something to say, and no patience left. Ruth sat at the table with the contract laid flat in front of her. The same paper, same ink, only now it felt heavier. Eli moved outside, checking the latch on the barn door, then the fence gate, then the water trough again. The same routine, the same quiet way of making sure things held. Ruth watched him through the window. He didn't look back. Didn't ask what she was thinking. Didn't need to. It started before dawn. A sound out past the ridge. Low. Distant. Not thunder. Hooves. Ruth was already up when Eli stepped in from the porch. Lower field, he said. She nodded. Grabbed her coat. Didn't ask more. They rode out together. This time side by side. No distance. The ground was still soft from the last rain. Tracks showed clear where the fence had been cut clean through. Not broken. Not worn. Cut. Water from the shallow stream had been redirected. A crude channel carved to pull it away from their side, toward Whitlock's land. Ruth dismounted first. Walked straight to the edge where the water slowed. Bent down. Ran her fingers through it. Cold. Still moving. Still theirs, if they held it. They want it dry by next week, she said. Eli looked along the trench, measured the angle. They brought men in the night, he said. Ruth stood, turned toward the ridge. They weren't alone. 3 riders stood watching from the far side, not hiding. Not moving. Waiting. Whitlock's men. Eli stepped forward half a pace. Not enough to block her. Just enough to stand with her. Ruth didn't look at him. Didn't need to. She walked to the trench, picked up a shovel left in the dirt, and started filling it back in. The first scoop landed heavy. Mud against mud. The riders didn't move. Second scoop. Third. Eli joined her without a word. His shovel hit the ground deeper, faster, but he matched her rhythm, not taking over, not leading, working beside. The sound carried across the field. Metal, dirt, breath. It didn't take long before someone else came. Old Mr. Halver from the neighboring stretch, walking slow but steady, cane tucked under one arm. He didn't speak, just picked up a loose board and started blocking the flow where it had been cut. then 2 more riders, then another. Word traveled fast in land like this. No one said Whitlock's name. No one needed to. By mid-morning, there were 10 of them working the trench. The riders on the ridge shifted. One turned his horse, then another. They didn't come down. Didn't try to stop it. They just watched until the water began to turn back. Then they left. By afternoon, the stream ran straight again. Not perfect, not fixed, but held. Ruth leaned on the shovel, looked at the line they'd rebuilt. Eli stood a few feet away, wiping mud from his hands onto his jeans. Neither smiled, but neither looked worn down either. Just settled. The court ruling came 2 days later. Short, dry. Whitlock's claim denied. No fraud proven, no seizure granted. For now. Milton delivered it himself. Didn't stay long. Didn't meet Ruth's eyes. Left the paper on the table like it might burn him if he held it too long. That evening, the wind died. For the first time in days, the air sat still around the house. Ruth stood by the table again. The contract lay where she'd left it. Edges curled slightly now. Ink beginning to fade where her fingers had pressed too often. Eli came in, set his hat on the peg, waited, not asking. Ruth picked up the paper, held it between both hands, read the first line once more. Then she tore it. The sound was sharp, clean. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just tore it again and again, until the pieces fell into her hands like something that had lost its weight. Eli didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't stop her. Ruth let the pieces drop onto the table, looked at him then, really looked. "I'm not staying because I have to," she said. The words sat there, simple, true. Eli held her gaze, then nodded once. No speech, no promise. He crossed the room instead, picked up a loose hinge on the door that had been rattling in the wind for days, set it straight, tightened the screws slow, careful, like he always did. Ruth watched him, the way he worked, the way he didn't rush to fill silence with words, the way he stayed, not because he had to, but because he chose to. She turned back to the table, brushed the torn pieces aside. Outside, the sky had cleared. The ridge stood sharp against the fading light, and for the first time since Samuel's name had been left behind on paper, the land didn't feel like something she was fighting to keep. It felt like something she was building again. Eli finished with the door. Tested it once. It held. He stepped back. Ruth moved toward him, not close enough to touch, but closer than before. That space between them had changed again. Not gone, but no longer something to measure. Just something to cross when it mattered. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet held, and this time, it felt like it belonged to them. Out here, nothing ever stayed easy for long. Wind came back. Fences broke again. Water ran thin when you needed it most. That was the way of the land. But something had shifted that no storm could undo. Ruth didn't win her ground because of a contract. She kept it because she stood her ground when it mattered, when it would have been simpler to step aside, to let someone else decide her worth. And Eli, he never tried to be the man folks whispered about. He just kept showing up, quiet, steady, choosing restraint when it would have been easier to lean into the fear people already had of him. Somewhere between the broken fence, the long silences, and that one moment in the storm they didn't talk about again, something real took root. Not loud, not rushed, just chosen. And maybe that's the part that stays with you, because not every life gives you a clean start. Not every love comes wrapped in kindness from the beginning. Sometimes it's built out of doubt, out of past mistakes, out of two people deciding, day by day, not to walk away. So if you had to choose, would you stay because it's safe or because it's right? And if stories like this, quiet, stubborn, and a little rough around the edges, stay with you, there's more waiting just beyond the next trail.